You're not going to believe this story. It starts with a simple loaf of bread, out on the edge of nowhere. But where it ends, well, where it ends changes everything. Mara stood on the porch of her cabin, the only sign of life for miles on the wind-swept expanse of Black Elk Ridge. The air was so cold it felt like shattered glass against her skin, but the smell of fresh bread wrapped around her like a warm blanket. She'd spent the last of her wheat, her knuckles cracked and bleeding from the grindstone, but she had to bake. It was more than food. It was a ritual, a prayer against the crushing silence. Hunger, she knew, wasn't just an empty belly. It was an empty soul. And that's when she saw him. He was leaning against a skeletal birch tree at the very edge of the woods, looking like a ghost the forest was trying to spit out. He was young, maybe her brother's age before the war swallowed him whole. A Lakota brave, draped in furs that had been torn to shreds by distance and despair. His face was a canvas of purple bruises, and his lips were split and raw. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched her, his breathing shallow, a tiny puff of white in the frozen air. Most folks would have slammed the door, bolted it shut, and grabbed a rifle. The stories that bled out of the territories were dark ones, filled with fire and fear. But Mara wasn't most folks. She didn't feel fear. She felt a strange, aching recognition. She saw the same silence in his eyes that she felt in her own heart. Slowly, carefully, she walked down the porch steps, the snow crunching under her worn boots. She held the loaf of bread in front of her, still steaming from the oven. It was all she had. She broke it in half, the sound a soft prayer in the quiet morning. "You need this more than I do," she said, her voice gentle, so it wouldn't spook him. He didn't move for a long moment. His dark eyes scanned hers, searching, looking for the lie, the trap, the poison. In his world, kindness from a white face was often the deadliest bait. He saw none. He saw only a woman with tired hands offering up her last hope. He took a shuffling step forward, then another. He reached out a trembling hand and took the bread not like food, but like a sacred object. He sank to the ground and ate in a way Mara had never seen. Each bite was slow, deliberate, almost holy. Tears welled in his eyes, but they were too proud or too frozen to fall. "What is your name?" she asked, kneeling in the snow a few feet away. His voice was a dry rasp like leaves skittering across ice. "Tayanita," he said. "I walked 3 days. My village, it was burned." Mara's throat felt like it was closing up. "Who burned it?" "Soldiers," he breathed, "in blue coats. We scattered like quail. I ran west." She looked at her own small world, a one-room cabin, a barren field sleeping under a blanket of frost. It wasn't much, but it was a universe compared to what he had. "There's little here," she said, "but I have more than you. Come inside." He hesitated. To step across that threshold was to cross into another world, one that had only ever brought his people pain. But then he looked at her face again, and he followed her inside. That night, she gave him a thin soup of dried roots and salted meat, and he slept on her only spare blanket by the fire. He was a shadow in her home, a quiet presence that somehow made the cabin feel less empty. When Mara woke the next morning, the first gray light filtering through the window, he was gone. A pang of fear, sharp and cold, shot through her. Had he been a dream? A ghost born of her loneliness? She rushed to the main room, her heart pounding. The blanket was folded neatly, the soup bowl was clean, and on the table, right next to her empty breadboard, sat a single, smooth, black stone. Carved into its surface was the unmistakable image of a hawk, its wings spread wide in flight. A thank you, a symbol of a warrior's spirit. Relief washed over her. He was real, and he was grateful. But then she picked up the stone. The weight of it was wrong, too heavy. She turned it over in her palm, her fingers tracing the carving. She looked closer, her breath catching in her throat. The light from the window hit it just right, and she saw it. It wasn't a hawk. The wings were too jagged, the beak too cruel. It wasn't the symbol of a noble hunter. It was the mark of a scavenger, a bird that feeds on the dead. It was the sigil of the crow. Mara's blood ran cold. The crow were the sworn, bitter enemies of the Lakota. They were ruthless trackers, often working as scouts for the very soldiers who had burned Tianita's village. They were hated. They were feared. He had lied. The man she had brought into her home, the man she had fed with her last loaf of bread, was not a victim. He was something else entirely. And the stone he'd left behind wasn't a gift. It was a marker, a sign. He was telling someone where to find her. The next 3 days were a special kind of hell for Mara. Every creak of the floorboards was a footstep in the dark. Every howl of the wind was the cry of an approaching war party. She slept with her father's old axe by her bed, her eyes wide open in the suffocating darkness of the cabin. She had been a fool. Her loneliness had made her stupid, and her stupidity was going to get her killed. She kept the crow stone on the mantelpiece, a constant, glaring reminder of her mistake. She would stare at it for hours, trying to understand. Why lie? Why pretend to be Lakota? What did he want from her? Was he coming back? Was he bringing others? On the third night, she got her answer. It started with a sound that didn't belong to the wind or the wolves. It was low, deep, and steady. A drum. Not loud, but it vibrated through the floorboards, up her spine, and into the marrow of her bones. It was a sound as old as the mountains themselves. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. This was it. They had come for her. She grabbed the axe, her knuckles white. She wouldn't die cowering by the fire. She flung the cabin door open and stepped out into the bitter, moonless night. The cold was a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. And she saw them. At the edge of the tree line, where the woods met her barren field, stood 3 figures. They were cloaked in deer skins, their faces hidden in the deep shadows of their hoods. Feathers, black as pitch, whispered in the biting wind. They were perfectly still, like statues carved from ice and night. Mara's mind screamed, run, hide, fight. But her feet were frozen to the ground. In the snow before the 3 figures lay a large, woven basket. A peace offering? A trick? She couldn't tell. Her mind was a whirlwind of terror. Then one of the figures stepped forward. The hood fell back, revealing the face of an old woman. Her skin was a roadmap of wrinkles, her eyes like chips of obsidian. They held no warmth, no pity, only an ancient, unsettling wisdom. "You fed one of our own," the woman said. Her voice was calm, but it cut through the silence like a knife. Mara clutched the axe tighter, her whole body trembling. I don't know what you're talking about." The old woman's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You gave with no ask. You honored the sacred way." It didn't make any sense. Why would the crow honor her for helping a man she thought was Lakota? Was this some kind of cruel joke before they killed her? "I didn't do it for anything in return," Mara stammered, the words tumbling out. "That is why we are here," the woman replied, her gaze unblinking. She motioned to the basket. "A gift for a gift." Mara stared at the basket, then back at the terrifying figures. Something was deeply wrong. This wasn't a thank you. It felt like a transaction, a contract she had unknowingly signed. Slowly, cautiously, she walked towards the basket. The 2 other figures remained motionless, their faces still hidden. They felt less like men and more like guardians of a tomb. She knelt in the snow, her eyes darting between the woman and the offering. Her hand shook as she reached into the basket. On top was what she expected: dried bison meat, a pouch of cornmeal, berries wrapped in cedar leaves. But her fingers brushed against something else underneath, something soft and familiar. She pulled it out. Her blood turned to ice in her veins. The axe slipped from her numb fingers and fell silently into the snow. It was a doll, a small, crude thing made of leather scraps and corn silk hair. It was filthy and tattered, but she would have recognized it anywhere. It was her doll, the one she had carried with her everywhere as a little girl, the one she thought she had lost 20 years ago in the fire that had destroyed her family's first homestead, hundreds of miles away from here. The fire she had barely escaped with her life. It was impossible. She looked up at the old woman, her mind reeling, a silent scream trapped in her throat. The woman's expression hadn't changed. "We have been watching you, Mara," she said, her voice soft, yet carrying the weight of a gravestone. "We have been watching you for a very, very long time." Mara couldn't breathe. The world tilted on its axis, the stars spinning in the black sky. This wasn't about a loaf of bread. This wasn't about a starving stranger. This was about her past. A past she thought was buried and burned to ash. The old woman took another step forward, her shadow stretching across the snow to touch Mara's feet. "The boy you fed, he was a test you passed." "A test?" Mara whispered, her voice cracking. "Tayanita is an outcast," the woman said, a flicker of something cold in her eyes. "He broke our laws. He was sent into the wilds to die. You were not supposed to help him." The pieces started to click into place, each one colder and sharper than the last. Tayanita wasn't a scout. He was bait. They had sent him to her, knowing she was alone, knowing she was vulnerable. "Why?" Mara choked out. "Why me?" The old woman pointed a long, bony finger at the doll in Mara's hand. "Because of him," she said. "The man who made this for you. Your grandfather." Mara's heart stopped. Her grandfather. He had died long before she was born. She knew almost nothing about him, only that he was a trapper who had settled in these mountains long before anyone else. "He made a promise to our people, generations ago," the old woman continued, her voice dropping to a low, ominous hum. "A blood oath, sworn on sacred ground. He promised to protect something for us, something priceless." "What?" Mara pleaded. "What did he promise?" The old woman's eyes narrowed. "He broke his promise. He stole from us. And for his betrayal, a curse fell upon his bloodline, a curse of fire and loss. The fire that took your home, that was no accident. It was the beginning of the debt being paid." Mara stared at her, horrified. The fire, the endless string of bad luck that had followed her family, the loneliness and hardship that had defined her entire life. It was all a lie. It wasn't misfortune. It was a curse. "The debt is not yet paid in full," the old woman said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Your grandfather's sin still casts a long shadow, but you are different. You showed kindness where he showed greed. You gave when he took." She gestured to the two silent figures behind her. They stepped aside, and from the deep darkness of the woods, a fourth figure emerged. It was Tayanita. He looked different. His face was clean, his hair braided. He wore not the tattered rags of an outcast, but the proud deerskin of a warrior. He walked forward and knelt before the old woman. He didn't even look at Mara. "The test is complete," the old woman declared to the night sky. "The curse can be broken. The debt can be paid." She turned her gaze back to Mara, and for the first time, Mara saw something in her eyes. It was a terrifying, hungry hope. "You, Mara," she said, her voice echoing in the frozen stillness. "You are the final payment." Mara felt like she was drowning. This couldn't be happening. She was just a farmer's daughter, a lonely woman in a cabin, not some piece in an ancient story of curses and betrayal. "What do you want from me?" she whispered, the words barely audible. The old woman smiled, a slow, chilling unfolding of her lips. "We don't want anything from you, child." She pointed a finger towards the dark, looming forest. "We want you the world went silent. The drum had stopped. The wind held its breath. Mara stood there, a forgotten doll in one hand, the weight of a cursed history pressing down on her, and she understood. This wasn't an offering. It was a collection. They had come to collect on a debt she never knew existed. Before she could scream, before she could run, the two silent figures moved with the speed of striking snakes. One grabbed her arms, his grip like iron bands. The other threw a thick, foul-smelling blanket over her head, plunging her into a world of suffocating darkness and panic. She fought. She kicked and screamed, but it was like fighting against the mountain itself. She was lifted off her feet, her cries swallowed by the heavy wool. The last thing she heard before her terror consumed her was the old woman's voice, calm and final. The prophecy begins. Take her. Mara lost all sense of time. She was thrown over a shoulder, the jolting rhythm of running feet her only reality. The smell of sweat, leather, and pine filled her senses. She was a sack of grain, a piece of property, her life no longer her own. She screamed until her throat was raw, but the sound never escaped the blanket. When they finally stopped, she was thrown roughly to the ground. The blanket was ripped from her head, and she gasped for air, blinking against a sudden light. She was in a massive clearing, deep in the heart of the forest. A huge bonfire roared in the center, casting flickering, monstrous shadows against the trees. Dozens of faces stared back at her, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and a stark, unnerving reverence. This was the Crow Village. It wasn't burned, it was alive, and it was terrifying. The old woman stood before her, flanked by Tyanita and the other warriors. Tyanita still wouldn't look at her. His face was a mask of stone. Was he her captor? Her co-conspirator? She couldn't tell. "Welcome to our home, child of the Oathbreaker," the old woman announced, her voice ringing through the clearing. All eyes were on Mara. She felt like an insect under a magnifying glass. "My grandfather. What did he do?" Mara managed to ask, her voice trembling. The old woman, who Mara now understood to be the tribe's elder, gestured to a tall, grim-faced warrior. "This is Kills the Knight. His great-grandfather was the chief who made the pact with yours." Kills the Knight stepped forward, his eyes burning with an ancestral rage. "Your grandfather was a trapper, yes, but he found more than furs in these mountains. He found a cave, our most sacred place, the Cave of Whispering Stars." He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. "Inside that cave, the spirits of our ancestors speak to us. They guide us, they warn us, and in that cave was the heart of our tribe, the Winter Count." Mara had heard of winter counts. They were pictorial histories, painted on buffalo hides, recording the most important event of each year for generations. They were a people's soul, their memory, their identity. "Your grandfather swore an oath," Kills the Knight continued, his voice low and dangerous. "He swore to guard the entrance to the cave during the harshest winters when we moved to the lowlands, in exchange for rights to trap on our lands. We trusted him, and he betrayed us. When we returned in the spring, the cave had been desecrated, and the oldest of our hides, the one that told the story of our creation, was gone." A collective gasp and murmur went through the crowd. This was a wound that had never healed. "He stole our beginning," Kills the Knight snarled. "He tore out the first page of our story. The spirits grew silent. The curse was born, not just on your bloodline, but on ours. We have known hunger, defeat, and division ever since that day. He didn't just steal a hide. He stole our future." Mara stared at him, horrified. This was so much bigger than a broken promise. It was a desecration, a soul theft. "Why me?" she cried out, looking desperately from the elder to Kills the Knight, and finally to Tyanita, who still remained silent. "I didn't do this. I knew nothing of it." "Blood carries the debt," the elder said simply, "but the spirits have finally spoken again. After generations of silence, they gave us a vision. A daughter of the Oathbreaker, with hands that give instead of take, would be the one to restore what was lost. They led us to you. They sent Tyanita as the test. So that was it. Her kindness hadn't been a virtue. It had been a sign, a marker that she was the one foretold in their prophecy. "But I don't have it," she insisted, frantic. "I don't know where the winter count is. How can I restore something I've never seen?" The elder's lips pulled back in a grim smile. "Oh, you will find it. The spirits said you would be the key. They said the blood of the Oathbreaker is the only thing that can call it back." A cold dread, deeper and more terrifying than anything she had ever felt, washed over her. "What does that mean? What do you want me to do?" The elder turned to the crowd and raised her arms. "The prophecy demands a ritual of blood and memory. We will take her to the desecrated cave at dawn. There, her blood will be spilled on the sacred ground. It will either cleanse the curse and call the spirit of the Hyde back to us, or it will prove the prophecy false, and her life will be the final, worthless payment for her grandfather's crime." The crowd roared its approval. It was a sound of desperate, hungry faith. They weren't just angry. They were broken, and they believed she was their only hope for being made whole again. Mara looked at Tyanita, her eyes pleading. He had eaten her bread. He had slept by her fire. He had to help her. Finally, he looked at her. And in his eyes, she saw no sympathy, no gratitude, only a cold, hard resolve. He was one of them. He believed in the prophecy too. He had used her. In that moment, Mara understood the terrifying truth. She hadn't saved a starving man. She had fed the executioner who was about to lead her to her own sacrifice. She was utterly, hopelessly alone. They dragged her to a small, isolated hut at the edge of the village, guarded by two stone-faced warriors. The night was a blur of terror. Every shadow seemed to mock her, every distant cry a promise of the dawn to come. She paced the small space like a caged animal, her mind racing. Escape was impossible. The village was a fortress of watchful eyes and ancient anger. Her grandfather, a name she barely knew, had become her death sentence. He had stolen their soul, and now they were going to take hers in return. She thought of her little cabin, her barren field, the quiet life she had carved out for herself. It seemed like a dream from another lifetime. She had baked bread to fight the silence, and in doing so, had summoned a nightmare. Just before the first hint of gray light touched the sky, the flap of the hut was thrown open. It was Tyanita. He stood there alone, the firelight from outside casting a long, wavering shadow behind him. He carried a small leather pouch. "It is almost time," he said, his voice flat. "You lied to me," Mara spat, her fear momentarily replaced by a surge of pure rage. "All of it, a lie." "I told you my village was burned," he said, his gaze unwavering. "It was, by the blue-coat soldiers, but I did not tell you why." He stepped into the hut, his presence filling the small space. "They were not attacking us. They were looking for something. Something my grandfather stole from them long ago." Mara stared at him, confused. "What are you talking about?" "The soldiers. They had a map," Tyanita said, his voice dropping lower. "A map to a silver mine in these mountains. A map they claimed was stolen from their fort by a Lakota warrior. They burned our village trying to find it." He looked her straight in the eye. "My grandfather was that warrior. He stole their map, and for his crime our people have been hunted ever since." The revelation hit Mara like a physical blow. He was just like her. A descendant paying for the sins of an ancestor. They were two sides of the same cursed coin. "So you understand," Mara whispered, a flicker of desperate hope igniting within her. "You understand that I'm innocent. You have to help me." "I cannot stop the ritual," he said, shaking his head. "The elder and kills the knight have the tribe's heart. Their faith in this prophecy is all they have left. To go against it is to die. He opened the pouch and took something out. It was a small, crudely carved wooden bird. But I can give you this. She took it. It was light, almost weightless. What is it? My grandfather did not just steal a map, Tianita said. He stole a life. The commander of that fort had a son, a little boy. In the raid, the boy was killed. His voice was heavy with a shame that was not his own. My grandfather was a great carver. He carved a bird just like this for the boy, a token of peace. But it was too late. The commander swore vengeance on his bloodline. He closed his hand over hers, forcing her to grip the wooden bird. The commander's name was Cutter. Cutter. The name sent a jolt through her. The slick-haired man who had come to her cabin, wanting her land. It wasn't random. Nothing was random. He is still searching, Tianita whispered urgently. Not for silver. For revenge. He believes the map was passed down to me. He has been tracking me for months. That is why I was an outcast. I led the soldiers to our winter camp. My people cast me out to save themselves from Cutter's wrath. The entire story was rewritten in an instant. Tianita wasn't a Crow collaborator. He was a Lakota outcast, haunted by two different histories of violence. He had run to her cabin not as bait for the Crow, but as a desperate man fleeing a relentless hunter. The Crow had simply found him first. What does this have to do with me? Mara asked, her head spinning. The winter count your grandfather stole, Tianita said, his eyes intense. Our stories say it was painted on a special hide, a white buffalo hide. It is a powerful artifact, not just to us, but to others. Cutter doesn't just want the map, he wants the hide. He believes it holds its own power. The ritual, he continued, his voice barely a whisper. The elder believes your blood will call the hide back. But the stories say something else. They say the hide cannot be summoned. It must be found. And only the one who balances the blood debt can see the path. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a glimmer of the man who had eaten her bread by the fire. You are the daughter of the thief. I am the son of the thief. We are the two halves of the debt. Suddenly, the hut flap was ripped open. Kills the Knight stood there, his face a mask of fury. The time is now. What is the meaning of this? He saw the bird in Mara's hand, and his eyes widened in rage. He lunged, not at Tianita, but at her. Traitor, you conspire with the outcast. Tianita moved like lightning. He tackled Kills the Knight, sending them both crashing to the floor. Run, Mara, he yelled. The cave is to the east. Follow the rising sun. The bird will show you the way. Find the hide. It's the only way. Mara didn't hesitate. She scrambled out of the hut and into the chaos of the waking village. Shouts erupted behind her. The alarm was raised. She ran, her lungs burning, the small wooden bird clutched in her hand. She burst through the tree line and into the dark woods, the sounds of pursuit close behind her. She ran blindly, stumbling over roots, branches whipping at her face. The entire Crow Nation was now hunting her. She had to find the cave. She had to find the winter count. It wasn't just about saving herself anymore. It was about saving Tianita, the man who had just sacrificed himself for her. It was about ending two curses that had been poisoning these lands for generations. She ran towards the pale glow of the rising sun, a desperate prayer on her lips, the fate of two peoples clutched tightly in her hand. The forest was a nightmare of grasping branches and treacherous shadows. Every snap of a twig behind her was Kills the Knight, his face contorted in rage. Every bird call was a signal from her hunters. She ran until her legs were numb and her lungs felt like they were on fire, fueled by pure adrenaline and Tianita's desperate plea. Find the hide. It's the only way. As the sun climbed higher, casting dappled light through the canopy, she risked a glance at the wooden bird in her hand. It seemed like a simple, crude carving, but as the sunlight hit it, she saw it. Faint, almost invisible etchings on its wings. They weren't letters. They were symbols. A winding river, a trio of peaks, a lone pine. It was a map, a child's toy turned into a guide. She changed direction, following the symbols, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She scrambled up a rocky embankment, her fingers raw and bleeding, and found herself on a narrow ledge overlooking a deep ravine. On the other side, nestled at the base of 3 jagged peaks just like in the carving, was a dark opening in the rock face. The cave of whispering stars. Relief washed over her, so potent it almost buckled her knees. But it was short-lived. A shout echoed up from the ravine below. They were closing in. She had minutes, maybe seconds. She scrambled down the other side, sliding on loose scree, and threw herself into the mouth of the cave. The air inside was cold and dead, heavy with the silence of a forgotten holy place. The darkness was absolute. She fumbled in the small pouch tied to her belt, her hands shaking. She had a few matches and a nub of a candle she always carried. With a trembling hand, she struck a match. The small flame burst to life, pushing back the oppressive dark. The cave was larger than she expected. The walls were smooth, covered in faded paintings of animals and stars, but it felt empty. Desecrated, just as Kills the Night had said. This was a place whose spirit had been ripped out. There was no white buffalo hide, no winter count, nothing. Despair crashed down on her. Had Tyanita been wrong? Was this all for nothing? The shouts from outside were closer now. They were at the entrance. She backed away, deeper into the cave, her candle flame flickering wildly. Her back hit the rear wall. It was a dead end. She was trapped. Kills the Night appeared in the entrance, silhouetted against the morning light, his warriors fanning out behind him. His face was a mask of triumphant fury. "Nowhere left to run, Oathbreaker's daughter," he snarled, advancing into the cave. Mara held the candle up, her last pathetic defense. Her eyes darted around the cave, searching for any escape, any hope. And then she saw it. On the floor, in the very center of the cave, was a circle of stones. And in the center of the circle was a patch of earth that was darker than the rest, as if it had been disturbed recently. The ritual site. The place where they were going to spill her blood. As Kills the Night advanced, his shadow fell across the circle. And in that instant, the light from her candle caught something on the back wall of the cave, something hidden in the shadows. Faint etchings, the same symbols from the wooden bird, the river, the peaks, the pine. But here, they were part of a larger, more complex drawing, a map. But it wasn't a map of the forest. It was a map of the cave itself. Her gaze followed the lines from the entrance to where she was standing, at the back wall. There was a symbol there she didn't recognize. A spiral. An ancient symbol for change, for a journey inward. "It is over," Kills the Night said, now only a few feet away. "No," Mara breathed, her eyes locked on the spiral. "It's just beginning." Acting on pure instinct, she pressed her hand against the wall, right on top of the spiral carving. For a moment, nothing happened. Kills the Night laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. And then, with a low groan of grinding rock, the wall began to move. It wasn't a door. The entire section of wall was receding into the mountain, revealing a dark, narrow passage behind it. A secret passage. The warriors gasped. Kills the Night stared, his jaw slack with disbelief. In all the generations they had mourned this cave, no one had known this was here. Mara didn't wait. She ducked into the passage, her candle held high. The wall began to slide shut behind her. Kills the Night let out a roar of fury and lunged for the opening, but he was too late. The wall sealed with a final booming thud, plunging him and his warriors back into the main cave, and Mara into a new, deeper darkness. The passage was tight and smelled of damp earth and centuries of stillness. It sloped downwards, deeper into the mountain's belly. Her small candle was a tiny star in an infinite night. Was she walking toward salvation or into her own tomb? After what felt like an eternity, the passage opened up into another chamber. This one was small, no bigger than her cabin, and the air here was different. It hummed with a strange energy, a latent power that made the hairs on her arm stand up. And in the center of the chamber, draped carefully over a series of wooden racks, was the most beautiful and impossible thing she had ever seen. It was a buffalo hide, but it was pure white as the winter snow, glowing softly in her candlelight. And painted on its surface in vibrant colors were the histories of a people. A spiral of images telling stories of hunts, births, battles, and ceremonies, all flowing from a central point: the creation of a tribe. The winter count. Her grandfather hadn't sold it. He hadn't destroyed it. He had hidden it. He had built a secret chamber to protect it. The betrayal wasn't what they thought. He hadn't broken his oath to guard the hide. He had broken his oath by never telling them he had moved it. Why? Then she saw something else, tucked into a fold of the hide. A leather-bound journal. Her hands shaking, she opened it. The handwriting was her grandfather's. It was a confession. He wrote of finding the cave, of the Crow people's trust, and of his growing fear. He had seen other trappers, surveyors, men with greed in their eyes, sniffing around the edges of the Crows' territory. He knew that if they ever discovered a place of such significance, they would desecrate it, steal the hide, and bring war to the tribe he had sworn to protect. So he did the only thing he could think of. He moved it. He spent a winter secretly digging the passage, creating the hidden chamber, and moving the winter count to keep it safe. He planned to tell the chief when they returned in the spring, but he never got the chance. The journal's last entry was chilling. He wrote that a man named Cutter, a commander from a nearby fort, had tracked a Lakota raiding party into his territory. Cutter was not a soldier. He was a butcher, obsessed with a stolen map and a dead son. My grandfather wrote that Cutter was getting too close, that he feared for the hide, for the Crow, and for his own family. I have hidden the hide, the last entry read. But I fear I have hidden it too well. If anything happens to me, I pray that one of my blood finds this. The oath must be kept. The stories must not die. He had died shortly after in a sudden rock slide that his family had always called a tragic accident. It wasn't an accident. Mara was sure of it. Cutter had found him. He had killed him, trying to find the hide's location. And then, as she read the last line, her blood ran cold. The key to the passage is not just the spiral. It requires the blood of my line to unseal the rock, the same blood that seals it. She looked back at the sealed passage. She wasn't trapped. She was locked in. And Kills the Knight and his warriors were locked out. Her grandfather had designed it this way. Only one of his blood could enter, and only one could leave. A deafening pounding began on the other side of the stone wall. Kills the Knight knew she was in here, and he would tear the mountain apart to get to her. Mara stood there, in the heart of the mountain, the glowing winter count on one side, a sealed stone door on the other, and the truth of a generation-spanning tragedy in her hands. She had found the hide, but finding it was only the beginning. Now, she had to get it out. And she was trapped in a stone tomb with an army of furious warriors waiting for her on the other side. The pounding on the stone door was relentless, a thunderous heartbeat of rage. Kills the Knight wasn't giving up. Mara's mind raced. The journal said her blood could open the door. But if she opened it, she was dead. Kills the Knight would kill her and take the hide, his version of the story the only one that would survive. But if she stayed here, she would die in the dark, and the truth would die with her. She looked at the winter count, its painted stories glowing in the candlelight. This was a people's soul, Tyanita's soul. She couldn't let it be lost again. She had to trust him. She had to trust that he had a plan. The one who balances the blood debt can see the path. That's what he'd said. She was one half, he was the other. This wasn't just her fight. Taking a deep breath, she took out the small knife from her belt. Her hand trembled as she made a small, shallow cut on her palm. Wincing, she pressed her bloody hand against the spiral symbol on the inside of the door. For a moment, silence. The pounding stopped. Then, with a deep groan that vibrated through her bones, the stone door began to slide open. Sunlight flooded the passage, blinding her. As her eyes adjusted, she saw them. Kills the Knight and his warriors, their faces a mixture of shock and fury, weapons raised. She stood her ground, her heart hammering. "The story you know is a lie," she said, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "Witchcraft!" Kills the Knight roared, taking a step forward. "She has defiled the sacred place with her magic." "It's not magic," a voice said from behind the warriors. "It is truth." The crowd of warriors parted. The old elder stood there, her face unreadable. And beside her, held between two guards but standing tall, was Tianita. He was bruised and bleeding, but his eyes were locked on Mara, and in them she saw a blazing hope. "My grandfather didn't steal the hide," Mara declared, holding up the journal. "He saved it. He hid it to protect it from men like Cutter." Kills the Knight laughed. "More lies from the Oathbreaker's mouth. The outcast has poisoned your mind." "Then look," Mara cried, stepping aside from the opening. "See for yourself." Hesitantly, the elder stepped forward, peering into the hidden chamber. She saw the glowing white hide, pristine and safe. She saw the care with which it had been stored. A slow gasp escaped her lips. The warriors behind her murmured, their certainty beginning to crack. "It cannot be," Kills the Knight whispered, his rage faltering in the face of the impossible truth. "It is," the elder said, her voice filled with a new, trembling awe. She turned to Mara, her ancient eyes seeing her for the first time. "The prophecy. It said the daughter would restore what was lost. We thought it meant a sacrifice. We were blind. But Kills the Knight wasn't ready to let go of his hate. She is still the blood of the man who brought us this curse. The debt is not paid." "He is right," a new voice boomed from the cave entrance. "The debt is not paid." Everyone spun around. Standing in the mouth of the cave, flanked by a dozen men in blue coats with rifles in their hands, was Cutter. His face was twisted in a triumphant sneer. "Been looking for this place for a long time," Cutter said, his eyes gleaming with greed as he saw the entrance to the hidden chamber. "Heard the stories. A magic Indian hide. I reckon it'll fetch a fine price." His gaze fell on Tianita. "And you, boy, your grandfather's map led me right here. The debt of your family is about to be paid in full." He raised his rifle, aiming it squarely at Tianita's chest. "No!" Mara screamed. In that instant, everything happened at once. Tianita, with a sudden burst of strength, broke free from his guards. Kills the Knight, seeing the true enemy, the man whose greed had started all of this, let out a war cry and charged not at Mara, but at Cutter's men. The Crow warriors, their confusion exploding into righteous fury, followed him, crashing into the line of soldiers. The cave erupted into a maelstrom of violence. Mara saw Cutter take aim at Tianita again. Without thinking, she ran from the secret chamber, grabbing a heavy rock from the cave floor. She threw it with all her might, hitting Cutter's arm just as he fired. The shot went wide, ricocheting off the cave wall with a deafening crack. Cutter roared in pain and anger, turning his attention to her. "You!" he snarled, raising his pistol. But before he could fire, Tianita was on him, tackling him to the ground. They rolled, a tangle of limbs and desperate fury. The small wooden bird fell from Tianita's pocket, skittering across the stone floor. Mara saw her chance. While the warriors and soldiers were locked in a chaotic battle, she ran back into the hidden chamber. She couldn't carry the hide herself. It was too large, too heavy. But she had to do something. She grabbed her grandfather's journal. That was the proof, the truth. When she emerged back into the main cave, the scene was chaos. Several warriors and soldiers were down. Kills the Knight was fighting like a demon, his rage finally aimed at the right target. Tyanita and Cutter were still wrestling on the ground, but Cutter was stronger. He gained the upper hand, pinning Tyanita and raising his pistol for a final point-blank shot. Mara screamed. But then, the old elder, who had been standing by the wall as if frozen, moved with surprising speed. She picked up the small wooden bird from the floor. She looked at it, then at Tyanita, then at Mara. A lifetime of stories, prophecies, and misunderstandings seemed to click into place in her mind. She looked at Kills the Knight, who was momentarily disengaged from the fight. "Kills the Knight!" she cried, her voice cutting through the din. "The debt! Balance the blood debt!" Kills the Knight looked at her, confused. He saw Tyanita about to die. He saw Mara, the woman he had wanted to sacrifice, holding the journal that proved her innocence. He saw the true enemy, Cutter, a man whose greed was a mirror of the sin he thought Mara's grandfather had committed. He understood. With a roar that was not of hate, but of justice, he threw his war axe. It flew through the air in a perfect, deadly arc and buried itself in Cutter's back. Cutter's body went rigid. The gun fell from his hand. He slumped over, dead, on top of Tyanita. The remaining soldiers, seeing their leader fall, lost their nerve. They turned and fled, the Crow warriors chasing them from the sacred ground. Silence fell in the cave, broken only by the panting breaths of the survivors and the groans of the wounded. Tyanita pushed Cutter's body off him and slowly got to his feet. He looked at Kills the Knight. Kills the Knight looked back. The hatred between them was gone, replaced by a new, hard-won understanding. Kills the Knight walked over and retrieved his axe. He then knelt and picked up the small wooden bird. He walked to Tyanita and held it out. "The debt of your grandfather is paid," Kills the Knight said. Then he turned to Mara. He bowed his head, a gesture of profound respect and apology. "The debt of yours is as well. You did what we could not. You saved our soul." Mara stood there, the journal clutched to her chest, her heart aching with sorrow and relief. It was over. The curses were broken. The elder came forward and took the journal from Mara's hands. She looked at the white hide, still glowing in its hidden sanctuary. "The prophecy was true," she said softly, "but we read it with hearts full of pain, so we could only see a story of blood. You read it with a heart that gives, and you found a story of truth." She turned to all her people. "This woman," she declared, her voice echoing in the now hallowed cave, "is not the daughter of the oath-breaker. She is the keeper of the word. And he," she said, putting a hand on Tyanita's shoulder, "is not an outcast. He is the brother of the hawk. This place," she said, gesturing to the land outside, "will no longer be a place of cursed memories. We will rebuild. Together, the Lakota and the Crow. This will be a new beginning." She looked at Mara, a true, warm smile finally reaching her ancient eyes. "And you started it all, child, with a single loaf of bread." Mara looked at Tyanita, and he smiled back, a real smile, full of relief and a future she never thought possible. She had walked into her cabin that morning a lonely, forgotten woman on the edge of the world. She walked out of the cave a part of something ancient, something new, something whole. The story wasn't over. In fact, it was just getting started, and it would be a story not of curses and debts, but of healing and hope, built on the foundation of a single, impossible act of kindness. And if you enjoyed this story of how a simple act of kindness unraveled a century of lies and brought two warring peoples together, then do me a favor. Don't just close this window. Hit that subscribe button, because the stories we have here are just getting started, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Thanks for listening.